Burns, I'm president of the Portsmouth Historical Society. Thank you so much for coming to this lecture tonight. It's our third in a series of Gentleman's Farm that Jim Garman did. He's already done Glen Farm and Oakland Farm, and you can find those taped on our website and on YouTube if you didn't get a chance to see those. So tonight's lecture is going to be on Sandy Point Farm, and at the end, if you're interested in this wonderful book, and you should be, we are selling them. It's Jim Garman's Gentleman Farms, and they're all autographed. So there's a pile of them up here. They're $20 for non-members, $18 for members. And after Jim's lecture, I'll give you a few quick updates on what the Historical Society is doing, but right now, we'll turn it over to Jim and Sandy Point Farm.
Well, now I got a microphone. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to see you all here. In doing some research, I found that I had given a lecture like this, although I had to update it, in 2007. So I guess we have to start over. Anyway, Gentleman's Farm. Gentleman's Farm is a concept in South Portsmouth, and a lot of cases it was people who summered in Newport and wanted to live in the country. They still had their estates in Newport in the Gilded Age. We all know what that is now. And by the way, that's never been mentioned on the TV show, but Mark Twain said that it was a Gilded Age because it was gold leaf. It wasn't real gold. Interesting. Anyway, this is the gates to Sandy Point Farm, which is just about the only thing left of it, except for the horse barn, of course. And a close-up of these gates, if you really look close at them, you see this. Still there in the posts. That's further down. That's not the main gates. That's the one just around the corner as you go into the stable. What's a gentleman's farm? Again, people, for whatever reason, who came to Newport for the summer, most of them are summer people, and they decided, whatever reason, they wanted to have a farm out in the country. And Portsmouth was out in the country. I came across a newspaper article the other day that said that Newport had really advanced, it was 1907, Newport had really advanced, but Portsmouth's a backwater. And if you go down the road to the beach, you can't see the beach because the high grass is in the way. I didn't bring that newspaper article, but it's really fun to read. It's pretty fragile. Anyway, I'm glad that worked out that way. I wouldn't want to see Aquidneck Island be like Manhattan. Anyway, they had these farms, and they were huge. I mean, there was much, at one point, and I'll get to this later on, Glen Farm ended up being 700 acres. Huge farm. Anyway, so we don't know why exactly. They also left Newport, interestingly, to go out to Little Compton and had a fishing shack out there. Much more than a shack, obviously, but they went out there to fish. So Portsmouth was a small, rural, agrarian town in the northern part of Aquidneck Avenue with a population at the turn of the century of just about 2,000. Okay, and it's about 18,000 now, just to get a comparison. So agriculture had been very prominent since the beginning, since 1638. So in the 1880s, a bunch of them, these farms were created. The first and most significant was that done by H.A.C. Taylor, Henry Augustus Coit Taylor. And he was a businessman. He had railroads and other things in New York. He had a home in New York on 77th Street, I think it was. Anyway, his father died. His father was very prominent. His father had been an advisor to Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, and he was very wealthy. And so HAC inherited a lot of money around 1882 and started buying up farms all over the southern part of Portsmouth. And eventually, obviously, they put them all together. The Oakland Farm had been owned in the late 1860s by August Belmont, and he sold that farm to Cornelius Vanderbilt II. He's not really the second. He took the number second, but there were others before him, going back to the Commodore. Anyway, Cornelius Vanderbilt sold his August Belmont sold his 125 acres of Oakland Farm to Cornelius Vanderbilt in 1886, and a lot of additions were added to that one as well. So a lot of small farms were taken over by these large so-called gentlemen's farms, and the southern part of Portsmouth was really scattered because of the size of these farms. Sandy Point Farm was created by a man named John N.A. Griswold. And John Griswold sold his farm to William Roch Ware in 1881. If the name Griswold rings a bell, John Griswold's house became later the Newport Art Association in Newport. And Roch Ware, I think, was from New Bedford, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, he had the farm. And then Ware sold his farm to Reginald C. Vanderbilt. Now, the Vanderbilts here, this is a scaled down chart of them. First, they have the Commodore up at the top. Then you have William Henry and 12 others. Cornelius II, and he married Alice Claypole Gwynn, and she was, her nickname was Alice of the Breakers. She lived in the Breakers until 1934, I think it was. She comes up again later. And then there were 8 others in that family too. So the children of Cornelius and Alice Claypole Vanderbilt were the bottom line. And the bottom line is, for our purposes tonight, important for 2 people, Alfred Gwynn and Reginald Claypole, the 2 over here on the right-hand side. There were 2 other men. One was Cornelius, and he died while he was at Yale in college. The other one, William Henry, was a bad man. He married out of class. He married a woman from Alabama, and Grace was her name, and she eventually became the real dowager of Newport society. She was one of the really important people. And although Cornelius was disinherited by his father, later on Alfred and Reginald found some way to give him a few $1 million. Anyway, that's the whole family, shortened up quite a bit. If I put all of them up there, it would drive you a little bit crazy trying to see who's who. All right, so here's Reggie. Reginald Vanderbilt, born in 1880 and died in 1925. And this is his look. He looks like this in every picture I can find of him. So he was young when he died. He was only 45. More about his career as we go on here. He was the 7th of 8 children of Cornelius II and Alice. And in 1899, Cornelius II died. And at the time he died, 1899, at the time he died, he was considered to be the wealthiest man in the United States. Okay. Now, so 1899, at that time, Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt inherited Oakland Farm, or his father had owned it before that time. So again, he was very wealthy, and his children were very wealthy, obviously. And Reginald attended Yale University, like most of the Vanderbilts, but he dropped out just before his graduation. He didn't take his final exams. He never graduated. So when he came of age, though, and turned 21, he inherited $7.5 million from his father. Now, I actually, because I'm dealing with the late 19th century a lot, I do comparisons. And you can do this online. You can say, you know, $7.5 million in 1899 was worth how much today? But I did it on this, and it's about $35 million. That's what he inherited from his father. When he died, he was bankrupt. Okay, so he got engaged to Catherine Gebhard Nielsen, who was an heiress from New York as well. And their engagement was announced in the New York Times and said in part, and this is really very instructive of Reginald Vanderbilt. This is at the time he was getting engaged. So far, it is very difficult as to what the young man will do in the future. He is very fond of outdoor sports, is a good polo player, has a fondness for horses, is a capital whip, and has proved himself quite an adept chauffeur. That means just driving a car. He did not distinguish himself at Yale last year, and he missed his examination. Those who know him say there is much good material in him, and that he will settle down and make a very practical businessman. He has not expressed as yet any aptitude for any following the pursuits of his father and his uncles, which were mostly railroads, by the way, New York Central and a few others. That's Reggie, and that's how he was after as well. He never worked, not a day in his life. So, a very accurate prediction of his existence and his future. He married Kathleen Nielsen in April of 1903, and in 1904 they had a daughter named Kathleen. So he had a home in New York on East 77th Street, and he purchased Sandy Point Farm in 1902. Again, right across the street, across East Main Road, from his brother, who had inherited Oakland Farm in 1899. The farm was a mess. It really hadn't been taken care of much, and Reginald was very much interested in horses, and what he did with his money over time was to make it one of the absolute centers of the horse raising business in the United States. There was a house that was pretty shady, it was falling apart, and he decided that this would be his nationally recognized horse farm in the United States, and he accomplished that. Here's a pretty ragged magazine picture of Kathleen and her daughter from about I can't read it, but it says, "Queen of Sandy Point back to her very own domain today." Okay. Now, the next slide shows you the layout. It's pretty small to see. But when the farm was started, get my directions right, the western boundary was Wapping Road. So it was everything from Wapping Road to the water, to the Secaucus River. You see on the left under Sandy there, you see the horse barn, the riding ring, and then you have the villa after that. Okay. I will in a second. I have a pointer, but I don't. A lot of these new TV sets, you can't use a pointer. Anyway, here's the horse ring. Here's the riding ring. Here's the house, and it's all this. It's it's shaped like a U, and then there's the trap, and then there's the house itself. These are all outbuildings, and most of those outbuildings, by the way, were there until about 5 years ago. Less than that, really. By the way, if you have questions, ask them, because I'm happy to point out. But anyway, so that was the boundary, and the entrance was here from the corner of Wapping and Sandy Point, and it rode around in there. And of course, that's where the main gates are even today. Okay. Eventually, he bought all the land on the other side of Wapping Road and out to the East Main Road. Okay, that was the ultimate size of his farm. Okay, so they found an architect to design a horse barn, and his name was Albert S. Walker. He designed the horse ring and stable all in one building. It was a little bit bigger than it is today. There was more in it, and I'm going to show you some of the interior of it in a minute. But Albert S. Walker, I'm a cemetery walker, and I walk through a couple of cemeteries. I live on Sandy Point, so I go over that way and I come this way. And one of the things I found in this cemetery right across the street is the tombstone of Albert S. Walker. Died in 1919. But what intrigues me, and one of the things about history, there's always mysteries that you come across. I really like that show on the History Channel, History's Mysteries, because it's really interesting, some of the things that are pointed out. Anyway, Albert S. Walker is on one side of about the second or third largest gravestone in this cemetery across the street. And on the other side of his tombstone are people named Cogshall. So he must have married into the family somehow, I don't know. But it's kind of interesting. I walk by there quite often, and it's really interesting to see his name. It's a very impressive building, as we all know. Just all I have to do is drive by it. It's awesome. And of course, Reginald spared no expense in getting it built. A couple of the interior views back in the day, there were stalls for 52 horses. Each one had a gold nameplate on the outside of the stall. And inside there were separate dining rooms for men and women. There was a trophy room, there was a gallery, and other so-called gathering rooms. A lot of parties were held in the barn. I don't know how they did that with the dirt on the ground or whatever. Maybe I'm sure they covered it up somehow. But anyway, this is some of the trophies that you see inside, horse trophies mostly, and photographs. Okay. speaking of photographs, by the way, I have an album up here of photographs of Sandy Point Farm. And I'll digress a minute. A woman by the name of Ruth Peckham lived in Portsmouth a number of years ago. And she asked me one time, would I like to see her pictures of Sandy Point? Well, she grew up there. Her father was the farm manager. And I think she died probably 10 or 15 years ago. But anyway, she loaned me this album of family pictures, and it was about 100 pictures. And most of those, almost all of them, I recopied. I was in the photography business for a while. Anyway, I copied them in the days before you could put them on a machine and crank it up. We had to do it in the dark room. Anyway, and there's an album up here on the table, which is mostly her pictures that she gave me, and they're really, really special, including these that we're looking at now. This is another gathering room inside the stable. And the stable had a big balcony on it as well, which is where they had parties a lot of times. They would have dinners there. More on that later on. Anyway, the photograph that you see, the painting that you see in the back up there is the Commodore, the original Commodore. And so it's kind of really cool place. And here's one more. Again, furnishings in the teens and 20s probably. A lot of pictures, a lot of horses. Now here's, you won't be able to read this, but I just put it up here. One of the things I did recently was get access to the files of Leonard Panaggio, who died about 7, 8 years ago. And his daughter was very kind to me to let me take a lot of it. I've accumulated 7 file drawers full of mostly newspaper clippings from way back, and up to about 1980 or so. Anyway, this is one of the newspaper clippings, which describes a party at the Vanderbilt house. And season's first big event, and it talks about all the people from Newport who came out and everything. And in this is 1904. They might have had cars, but most of them probably came horse and buggy. So that's the kind of thing I have acquired, which is really cool stuff to have. Talks about the dinner and the tables and who was there and so on. What's it say? Many prize cups which Mr. Vanderbilt has won in various contests, each filled with large bunches of American Beauty roses. On some of these party notices, I find they put lanterns from East Main Road to the farm along the side of the road. Anyway, it was a great place. A scene of gaiety, they said often. Yeah, that's kind of thing. The farm had its own powerhouse. Okay, this is the inside of it. And I have a newspaper clipping somewhere. They had a fire in the powerhouse, and it was put out by the fire department. We were talking about this with someone before. The fire department from the Glen, from Oakland, and from Sandy Point. They had their own fire departments too. Interesting. Okay, so the main thing involved with Sandy Point was horse shows, national horse shows and local horse shows. I'm going to use the word hackney a lot in the next couple slides. A hackney, I'll show you some pictures of them, but the hackney was like a little cart, not so little, but a two-wheeled cart pulled by a horse. But the real value, competitive value in hackney showing was the control of the horse, as you will see. And Reggie was a really good horseman. I have some pictures of him coming up. This is a case of one of the horses called Fortitude, who was one of the national horses. I think, I read this afternoon. Was it this one? No, it wasn't this one. This is a dinner they were having at Oakland Farm. The other one I'll remember when we get to it. Anyway, here he is posed in front of the gates. Monday, August 27th, 1923 at Sandy Point Farm. Okay. The Newport Horse Show was an annual thing. It wasn't doing much before 1908, 1909, but then all of a sudden it became a really important place to be and to go. Here are some advertisements for horses. Wembley Sensation, Sandy Point Confidence. And the important thing here, I'm going to mention this guy a bit. says it's signed by William H. Bone, the farm manager. He was really important. He was at the farm. I'm going to talk more about him later on too. He was at the farm for about 22, 23 years. And it was his daughter, Ruth Peckham, who let me borrow the photograph. Yep. So they're advertising for stud services for Hackney horses. And here's another handbill it's the kind of thing I've accumulated a lot of stuff. I don't know what I can do with it all. 82 albums of photographs and postcards. Anyway, here is Reggie driving Dr. Selwonk. You get little mysteries when you do this kind of research. You know, where'd the name Selwonk come from? The only thing I've figured out so far, and I have no idea if this is the truth, is that he knew somebody named Dr. Knowles. And he spelled his name backwards to name the horse. That's the only thing I can think of. That word doesn't mean anything. It's really kind of cool to try to figure out. But see, this is what, when you're driving a hackney, this is what the horses do. And of course, that's what they're judged on when they're in contests. So there's Reggie. More hackney stallions at stud. Tiger Lily, Sandy Point, and Wembley Sensation. Again, all these were national champions. And Reggie built that thing up, Reggie and Mr. Bone, built this farm up to national recognition. And not only did they have horses, they had sheepdogs. And they had sheep as well. And most of the farms had other animals. Love sheepdog. I have a very shaggy dog myself.
Did you read Sire of Winners of Every Old English Sheepdog at the 1911 Westminster?
Oh, jeez. William Bone, manager. Okay. Don't read too much about Reggie out in the kennels with his dogs, though. It's always the horses. Here's a picture of William Bone. He was from England, and again, worked at the farm, as you see, manager from 1902 to 1924. And by the way, it went out of business in 1925, after he died. He did other things too, though. He was very much involved in the community. He was a town councilman, among other things. So very much involved. And it was his daughter, Ruth Peckham, who allowed me to borrow those pictures. The other picture up there, I have no idea what that is. Got a horse on a table. Dogs. Maybe somebody can explain that someday. I don't know. I just put it in for fun, though. Okay, in addition to farm animals, Reggie liked to raise cars, too. Great collection of automobiles. He had 25 cars. This is some of them. And when he got on the road, look out, as you'll see in the next slide. He was arrested racing down the East Main Road with his brother, Alfred, and they exceeded the speed limit, which was 10 miles an hour. They were going 15. And after thinking about challenging the charges, they finally decided to accept them. And what it says in the fine print in this, that the charges were $10 plus $2.50 for court costs. And they both were significant millionaires at that point. Anyway, they were racing all over the place. And even some of their chauffeurs were racing too. So, yeah, they get in trouble for this. And there's a story of the Middletown police officer who decided he was going to go out there and he was going to stake them out and catch them. And finally he did. Anyway, that didn't slow them down any. They raced everywhere. They had one race that went to Boston from here. And think about what the roads were like at that point. No expressways. So the horse shows, though, were a very important part of a selection of our culture and society's culture. It was really a big thing as far as society was concerned. I have a few pictures of not only horse shows, but horse carriage shows in Madison Square Garden, including one that shows a very famous Vanderbilt coach. So they were popular in other parts of the country. Sandy Point Farm in Oakland went as far as Kansas City to compete in horse shows or other competitions. And there were a ton of blue ribbons that came back. So the reputation grew, and Reginald's Farm was well represented by horses with names like Fortitude, Dr. Selwonk, Lady Dillon, and others. He actually raised, and I can't remember the name of the horse, but he actually raised one horse for, you know, Kentucky Derby kind of stuff too. And didn't win, but did very well in that kind of racing. Mostly though it was, you know, just show horses. I'm not sure they ever got ridden, I wonder. Okay, so the horse shows were around for a lot of years, but Reggie decided he was going to, you know, elevate the view of them. And he was going to bring these shows together in a national organization, and he did. He called a meeting in New York City for horse show promoters to centralize all their activities, to work out a schedule, and, you know, just so they wouldn't compete with each other and so on. And that brought about the creation of the Association of American Horse Shows, which was a national organization. And of course, Reggie was the president of it for about 7 or 8 years. His idea. Okay. Here's a prize list for the Newport Horse Show in 1900. And inside there were all kind of different, so many different categories in which they were competing. Okay. And they would have them at the casino in Free Body Park. I have a postcard of a horse show at Free Body Park, and there's one gentleman just walking off away from a horse. It's Reginald Vanderbilt. I can pick him out. He's very distinguished. When you see him, you can't miss him. And the next slide, I'll let you try that. Okay, so he was president of the horse show, the Newport Horse Show, as well as in the national organization. Okay, where's Reggie? Second from the left, yep. Again, very distinctive. Look at all the other gentlemen sitting there. And next to Reggie on his left is Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt, the third one from the left. This is down at the Breakers stable, I think. They were planning a horse show at that point. So, enough about horses. Back to Reggie's life. He was devoted to the raising and showing of fine horses and hackneys, and hackney horses as well. As far as his personal life, he did marry Kathleen Nielsen in 1903 and had a daughter, Kathleen, who was born in 1904, and that's the two of them. And it says that at a charity feast in Mrs. A.G. Vanderbilt's Newport estate. That's the thing. They had estates in Newport as well as the farms out here, plus houses in New York, of course. Anyway, so Reginald was never seriously employed. They had a desk for him at the New York Central office in New York, but he almost never was there. Neither was he a faithful husband. He had a few affairs and other social problems. And the main social problems that he had were gambling and drinking. You've heard the name Canfield before. Richard Canfield was he created a whole bunch of gambling casinos. One was in Newport, right around the corner from Bellevue Avenue. He was arrested for running a 10-cent poker game in Providence. He served 6 months in jail for that, and he was 18 years old. Later, he got involved in expanding gambling businesses in Providence, New York, Saratoga, and Newport. Reggie was a great customer of his. Okay. 1890s, 1900s. Reginald Vanderbilt it was recorded at one time that at Canfield's Casino in one night in New York, Reginald gambled away $400,000. I guess that was a problem for him. I don't know if I said before when I was starting, when Reginald died, he was broke. Okay. More than that, he owed a lot. Okay, so he had inherited $7.5 million from his father, Cornelius, when he died in 1899, and he had a lot of money to spend, and he did. He went to Canfield's casinos often, especially in New York. He got caught in New York one time, and it was a situation where he wasn't actually arrested, he escaped, and the police set out a warrant for his arrest to try to find him. And the newspaper account says, Reggie came into New York last night, but then he left before he got caught. You know, things like that. Anyway, he was a frequent visitor, and also he was a serious alcoholic. Brandy milk punches was his favorite. More about that as we go on. So over time, his marriage deteriorated, and An indication of that was when the family went to Paris. He, his wife, and his daughter went to Paris in 1912. And whether by choice or whether by abstraction, he came home. He left them there. And he left them without any money. Kathleen was getting a little discouraged with Reggie by this time, I think. That was in 1912. And eventually he sent them some money so they could get home. Kathleen filed for divorce and was granted in 1919. Okay. In 1915, Reggie's older brother, Alfred Gwynn, died on his way to England for a horse show on the Lusitania. Lusitania was torpedoed by the Germans. This was during World War I. And off the coast of Kinselhead, off southeastern Ireland, the ship was sunk close to shore. It was only about 3 miles, 3.5, 4 miles from shore. Anyway, one torpedo took it down, and Alfred Gwynn died. And there's an account, I actually found this in the town records. There's an account that says that Alfred Gwynn, as the ship was sinking, handed his life jacket to a woman. He couldn't swim. So he died. They never found his body. And where Reggie had been spending all his money, Alfred Gwynn had been making more. He was very wealthy. Okay. One of the, excuse me, one of the stories I heard was that when he left to go to take the Lusitania, he went out one of the gates at Oakland Farm, and time out. The gate was closed after that and never opened again. One of those gates down the road here, you see them. Anyway, Reggie didn't change his ways, and soon in 1922 he fell in love again. She was a young woman. Young. He was 42, she was 18. Okay. And as they got engaged, he gave her a 16.5 carat diamond engagement ring. No expense spared. It took a while for him to get his mother's permission, but eventually Alice agreed that he could marry her. And they were married March 6, 1923. By this time, Reggie's health was deteriorating significantly. There had been a lot of fixing up of the mansion at Sandy Point, and it continued to be a location of a lot of activity of Newport social life, as well as an important center for horses, as I mentioned. Reggie and Gloria often, his new wife was Gloria, not the Gloria, but her mother, and they took several trips to Europe. They often left people just were gone for a while. He was looking for health cares, and of course he would sit at some of these spas in Europe and drink brandy milk punches. Anyway, when they came back to Portsmouth, they hosted the annual New Faux Show, the Newport Horse Show dinner at Sandy Point. It was a brilliant occasion for all the horse people every year. Big deal. And Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, Reggie's wife, delivered a baby named Gloria Laura Madeline Sophie Vanderbilt in New York City on February 20th, 1924. As you may or may not know, she just died about 2 years ago. And this is the Gloria Vanderbilt. And that's her mother and her. Okay. After another trip to France in 1925, Reggie and his wife came back to Sandy Point Farm, and Reggie was not well. Gloria was advised, meanwhile, by her mother, who lived in New York, that her grandmother, who was in Chile, was dying, and she needed to go there to see her. So Gloria left for New York City, and when to wait for Reggie there. When she got there, she called the farm and found out that Reggie had suffered a serious health setback. And so she turned around and came back to Portsmouth. She arrived back here at 4:30 in the morning and was advised by the butler that her father had just died a few minutes ago. His mother Alice was tending to him, and she refused to let Gloria into the room. He suffered 2 esophageal hemorrhages, and her mother said there's blood everywhere. And so he died a horrible death related to his chronic alcoholism. September 4th, 1925. All of Newport really mourned Reggie after his death. The wake was at the farm. Services were at St. Mary's Church in Portsmouth. And then he was taken to New York, where he was buried with the rest of the Vanderbilt family in a huge mausoleum on Staten Island. Even the original Cornelius is there. So when he died, he was 45, she was 20. Gloria was 20. And this is his obituary in the New York Times. Can't read it all very well, but that's how much coverage he got. It's the kind of press clippings I've been finding lately. Great. So when he died, the probate of his estate revealed that he was seriously in debt. According to an article in the Providence Journal, the personal estate of the late Reginald C. Vanderbilt was insufficient to pay his debts, meet the expense of the funeral, support the family, or pay for the settlement of the estate. The executive of the estate in Newport has revealed. His wife, Gloria, there were a couple trust funds, by the way, that were untouchable. One for young Gloria and one for Kathleen. Among that $5 million that came from Cornelius, his father. He had nothing. They had the property, they had Sandy Point, they had the house, the home in New York, but it just essentially bankrupt. One of the things I found, and we have it in our archives here in the museum, is a list of the individual indebtedness of Reginald when he died. It is a folder about that thick. Huge. I mean, just individual stores in Newport, you know, he owed them $135, he owed them $2,000, etc. And most of them were never settled. Another newspaper article, this one's really hard to read because it's old. Some of these newspaper clippings, and I have a couple up here, are 100, 120 years old. But this is the auction sale at Sandy Point Farm in 1925. Okay, an ad for it, 1926, I'm sorry. An ad for it, and then a little bit about what's going on there. And here is a photograph in the barn of the auction, you know, getting ready for the auction, I guess. 3-day auction, horses, carriages, saddles, bridles, collars, everything was sold. And it wasn't enough to pay off his debts. There's another picture of the auction time. On time. Okay. Now, the inheritance of Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, Reggie's wife, amounted to $4,000 a month. And she had to go to court to get that. It was less than that. It was really nothing when the probate started. The home in New York was sold in 26 for $150,000. Today I'm sure it's still there, and today it's probably worth about $15 million. And Sandy Point Farm was sold to Moses Taylor of Glen Farm for $165,000. That's when Glen Farm became over 700 acres. The receipts of those sales were used to pay off more of the debts, but not all of them. Moses Taylor, as he inherited Sandy Point, had to make a decision whether he wanted to keep the mansion or not. He was going to give it to his daughter. But in 1927, he decided it was not in very good shape, so it was torn down. Moses Taylor mainly bought, and Moses Taylor, by the way, died in 1927, I think. But his wife stayed on there until she died in 1959. But he didn't really know what he was going to do with it. It was just a matter of protecting his farm. And somewhere in the middle of that, the Taylors decided to donate Sandy Point Beach, which was right in the middle of the two estates together. Again, Glen Farm is another story, and I gave that one a couple months ago, so read my book. Okay, so again, Edith Taylor Nicholson died in 1959. Her son, different Reginald, began to sell off much of Glen Farm piecemeal. A lot of the houses were given or sold cheaply to the farmers, the workers on Glen Farm. But you can still imagine pretty well what the size of Glen Farm was like. And much of Sandy Point Farm was sold to Hyman Leaps in 1965. He in turn sold it to Rudolph Friesel who wanted to develop it in the house lots. Think about that, from the horse barn down, no houses. Wow. So the horse barn was saved, and only the horse barn and some of the gates are about the only thing left of it today. Although, again, some of the farm buildings were just sold a few years ago. And we all know what it looks like today. Yes? Kevin.
You go down Sandy Point Avenue to the bottom, and as you turn the last corner, and you look to the south, it would be the right-hand side. There was a fence there, and the fence had a gate. And inside the gate, there was a graveyard for, I think, I'm trying to remember now because I was just a boy, there were either 2 or 3 ponies, and on one of them I remember it saying, taught the Taylor children how to ride. And then there were 2 graves for dogs. And one of the slide that you had of the horse, if we knew the name of that pony and that dog, I'm sure, and I don't know whether those graves are still there or not. Interesting.
Yeah.
There were headstones there.
Yeah. There was a horse cemetery at Oakland, too, and a fairly big one. And one of the developers of Oakland has them in his garage somewhere. The stone. Pardon?
What became of the headstones that were there?
For Oakland? At Oakland, you mean?
Yeah.
They were taken by the developer. That's all I heard. Yeah. Anyway, they had a pretty big cemetery there. Interesting. Okay, so anyway, about all that's left though is the horse barn. Hopefully it'll stick around a while, and the gate posts and so on. I have an afterword here. I have a couple of afterwords, so bear with me. First of all, in 1934, there was a big custody battle for Gloria Vanderbilt, the younger Gloria Vanderbilt. Her mother was on one side, her aunt, get straight, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney was on the other side. And it was a very embarrassing court case. There was a, where'd it go? Eventually, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney won over Gloria's own mother to get custody of her. And there was a book written a few years ago called Little Gloria Happy at Last, which is all about that trial. Well, the picture you see on this slide is the author and me. And the author said in her book, I have to quote this, "For the chapters pertaining to Newport and Portsmouth, Rhode Island, I am indebted to the Newport Preservation Society, the Newport Historical Society, but mainly to James E. Garman, a fine scholar with access to the files and photographs of these organizations. Mr. Garman has assembled an enormous collection of Vanderbilt memorabilia and served as my guide to the Vanderbilt mansions and farms of Rhode Island." 1980, long time ago. And we toured around. We went, Sandy Point was much more established at that point. We went around, wait, let me finish. Went around and saw things and did something I've never seen anybody else able to do. The State Police Barracks was manned at that time. She got us in. I don't think anybody ever walks in there except state policemen when they were being there. Anyway, she got us in. We saw what where the Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilts had stored, and the William Vanderbilt had stored all their jewelry and everything in the wintertime. They had a vault in there, a walk-in vault. And interesting. Anyway, so Barbara Goldsmith Perry, she's written a couple other books. She's written a very good book on the women's suffrage movement. And I think it's under Barbara Goldsmith because she got divorced later. But that might be somebody to look up. And this Gloria Vanderbilt one is really good. There's also another book that I want to mention. It's this one. You all know Anderson Cooper. He's the grandson of Reginald Vanderbilt. Gloria Vanderbilt was his mother. And he's in the Vanderbilt tradition. Anyway, he recently wrote a memoir. This one, it just came out about 5-6 months ago. Vanderbilt's The Rise and Fall of an American Dynasty. Anderson Cooper and Catherine Howe. Really worth reading if you want to look at the Vanderbilts, because it's very brief. It goes back to the Commodore, and it goes up to Anderson, And he agrees that the Vanderbilts just got rid of their fortune. They just, I can't think of a nice way to say it. They lost it all anyway. And it's really a good book. It's really worth reading. Those are good. Anyway, how are we doing on time? Okay. So that's a really important heritage of South Portsmouth. And we who live in South Portsmouth are very proud to call it that. But, and again, the really neat thing, I think, of all these gentlemen farms is that you can drive around and you can sort of see where they were. Some of us worked really hard to save the Oakland forests over here, the one section of Oakland Farms that's still wild. And I was involved in that probably 20 years ago. And that just got national consideration, national mention, that saving that forest. It'd be nice if we get saved at all, but anyway, that's you can see that. You can reconstruct in your mind all of these places. Get down to the barns at Glen Farm, you know, and look around. And you can get down there. You can drive through there. You can walk down there. I walk down there all the time. But anyway, so it's a great tradition of Portsmouth history, something a little bit different from, you know, Anne Hutchinson and the first settlers. But this town has so much history. I've scratched the surface in 40 years. Okay, there's still a lot more. And I keep finding things. Someone told me yesterday, one of the members of the Historical Society Board, that there's a Narragansett Heights in Portsmouth. Anybody know where that is? Right next to Common Fence Point. Yep. I never heard that name before. Weird. And he says it's in his deed and everything. Interesting. You learn every day. Anyway, before I finish, I have one other thing I have to do, and I would like to have Anne come up here a minute. I've hidden something away. A number of years ago, when I was dealing with Ruth Peckham and her stuff, her son gave the Historical Society a print. And the print hasn't, I held on to it. I held on to it because we had no climate control in this building. And I was really afraid it was going to disintegrate. Anyway, we do have climate control now. You can tell it's fairly warm in here tonight. Anyway, this is for the Historical Society. And it's the same Reginald Vanderbilt with Dr. Selwonk. You can see the light, see it through the light, you can really see it. It's duller than it looks in the spotlight. And what's interesting, and I never noticed this before, but on the background is William Bone and an obituary of William Bone. I never knew that was there. Anyway, so this is going to hang here somewhere under climate control, and it's a highlight of what I have been talking about for the last hour, and I think it's really special. So here. Thank you. Got it? Yeah. Of course, I never want to hold on to archives, but that one, I was really concerned about the climate control.
Don't be afraid to donate things to the Portsmouth.
You betcha.
Climate control.
That's right. So do we have time for questions? Anybody have any? Yes. Speak up really loud. You can take your mask off just so we can help you.
The building at Sandy Point that had the clock tower,
Mm-hmm.
what was that building originally used for?
I'm not sure it was exactly that building, but the fire department was in part of that structure
Which
there.
building is that, Jim?
Pardon?
Which building?
The building had the clock tower on it. That was there until a couple of years ago.
Right.
Clock.
Yeah, it was the one that really stood out.
Right in back to the barn.
Yeah.
There were a lot of sort of farm buildings around it. And I know it was, part of it was the garage for the cars.
That was the fire station for Glen Farm after Sandy Point.
Was it?
Yeah.
Mm.
They had their own fire engine, their own fire department.
Sandy Point did too.
Huh?
And Oakland did too. All of them did.
Yeah.
Can't wait for those forcing fire trucks to get up from the bottom of Quaker Hill. And they helped out at other fires as well. Hmm?
Are you familiar with Arthur Sherman's mother's diary?
Absolutely. I had it in my hands for about 6 months.
Did you know what she said on the day that Reggie died?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I won't repeat it. You know it. Maybe you'll repeat it.
I'll repeat it. I'll repeat it. This is a woman who was kind of a town gossip.
Yeah.
Arthur
She kept
Sherman's.
the diary.
She was Arthur Sherman's mother. She kept the diary from 1898 to 1935. I was given access to it at one point, and I copied about half of it. I mean, I typed about half of it. Then I gave it back, and a few years later, I went to get it again because I was going to get the whole thing. And it was given to a family that had a lot of kids, the Roach family, and it got disseminated among them. It was all over the place. Anyway, her comments are precious. She said, when Reginald Vanderbilt died, she said, Reginald Vanderbilt died today, drank himself to death. That's it. But she was always saying, Arthur went to a meeting of this last night, and Arthur did that, and Arthur's, it was really interesting stuff to read. It's great stuff. I have probably 70 pages of it, at least. So, yeah, I use that sometimes. Question? Speak up. So
We know that horses were raised at Sandy Valley, in Sutter's Farm, but what about all the other ones? I mean, were they growing vegetables?
the other land? You mean? Oh, yeah.
Really?
They had farmland, cropland all the way up to the road.
But they were growing vegetables or things to sell?
Everything. And they competed with one another at the Newport County Fair, which was 1898, I think, until 1928. Newport County Fair was at the fairgrounds, down across from St. Barnabas there. And the competition between the gentlemen's farms for who could make the best, whatever, cantaloupe, was fierce. It was fierce. Yeah, I have a couple of pictures of horse and coach being displayed at that fairgrounds. And one of them very obviously has Moses Taylor in it. I can recognize him. Anyways, I'm getting to know some of these people. It's fun. Yes?
I missed your talk on the Glen Farm, and the building that's down there now that is so deteriorated, is that their barn? Down Glen Road?
Which one? I mean, there are a lot of barns, a lot of horse barns.
As you go down Glen Farm Road,
Mhm.
it's off to the left.
There?
Where the alpaca farm was.
Up there.
That's an old
I don't know. I haven't been down there lately.
deteriorating barn and buildings down there.
Yeah, there's
She's talking about Stanford Farm, I believe.
Yeah.
Where the alpacas are, that was part of that farm.
That's where they kept their automobiles for the Glen. And the chauffeur had an apartment upstairs. And so if they were going to go somewhere, they would call him and he'd bring up the limo there. But I haven't been down there lately. I don't know what the condition is. I go through the Glen a lot, but I usually just go by the horse farm. But it's a separate farm, but it was part of the Glen. That was horses, and especially dray horses. Dray horses are those big, huge ones that pull wagons and stuff. But yeah, that was there.
That's just been sold privately, I believe.
Has it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. They are doing some work, as Andrew told me this afternoon. They're doing some work on some of the buildings down at the Glen, roofs, things like that. So the town is finally getting involved in cleaning up some of that, which is great. Okay.
And I'm happy to say that we're going to be reopening the museum in May, starting Memorial Day weekend, which is what our normal hours are, every Sunday from 2 to 5 throughout the season. And now that we have heat and AC, we might even go extended it a little bit longer. We're going to have a private opening for members a couple of days before, so if you are a member, you'll get an invitation to that. And we are always looking for volunteers. So if you'd like to be a docent, we give training, or you could just be a greeter and just sort of be here to say hello, and you're not held accountable for knowing anything. You just have to say hello. But it's really interesting because the people you actually learn a lot from the people who come to visit. A lot of times people just come through, and other times they're here on a mission, and they'll tell you things. It's a fun way to spend a couple of hours. So sign up if you want to do that. If you're not a member, I would encourage you to be a member so that you can really be involved in the community and involved in everything that we do. One of the other events that we have coming up is the Navy choristers do benefit concerts twice a year, and for charity. They're hugely popular, and they picked the Portsmouth Historical Society to do their spring concert. It's going to be held on May 13th at St. Barnabas Church at 7:30. Tickets are $15 for adults and $10 for seniors and children. We have tickets for sale if you'd like to go, or again, you can contact any one of our board members to buy those. I think we get like 500 people. It's some insane amount of people come to that. It's a lot of fun. And if you have a business, or if you'd like to be a sponsor, they have we have program availability for, like, if you want to, if you have a business card that you'd like to buy an ad. It's another way to raise money for projects that the Historical Society has going on, which are a lot. We've sorted through, we have a lot of really great old archives that we've cataloged now, and we'd like to digitize them. You can come in and see them if you make an appointment in our room once we reopen, but they're things that, like, people don't, they're not anywhere out there in the universe, they're here. And so it's expensive to actually digitize them, to get them, shareable. So that's something that money would go towards. And last but not least, our board member Beth over here had a good idea. We do host book clubs from time to time. With COVID, we haven't, but I think Beth and I are going to host a book club on this book. Wouldn't that be fun? So stay tuned. It's obviously very casual. Half the time, people show up thinking that it's a lecture, but it's not. It's actually, you read the book, and we talk about the book. But it's a lot of fun. It's very casual. It's just something interesting to do.
Have drinks too.
Well, we can. It might be a good fun thing to do in the summer at Sandy Point Beach, right? So does anybody have any other questions? Come up and buy a book, and thank you all so much for coming. Again, I love all of your lectures, but that was really good. Like, those pictures were so unique and really good. So
Coal mine next.
yes, we're going to do one on the coal mines. Yeah, on the coal mines. We have a bunch of them coming up. So thank you once again.